Hello, and welcome to today's NEASC Virtual Global Forum, The Reality of Reopening International Schools. Today's session focuses on staff and students from 2 international schools who have reopened for the 2020-21 school year. I am Allison Geary, Deputy Director with the Commission on Public Schools at NEASC. Working with me today is Jeff Bradley, Director of the NEASC Commission on International Education. We're excited that today's audience includes more than 500 educators and colleagues from over 50 countries around the world. We thank you for your participation. Today we're speaking with teachers and students from the Zurich International School and the Western Academy of Beijing. Both schools reopened using a hybrid model several weeks ago. We'll talk with them about how things are going in general and if their COVID-19 classroom and remote learning strategies have worked out as planned. We hope to focus on the frontline experience of teachers and students and what students are thinking about being back in school and what lies ahead for their futures. I'll join you near the end of the webinar, but for now, I'd like to pass the conversation over to my co-host, Jeff, who will start the introductions.
Hello, everybody, and thank you, Allison. Our topic today is the realities of reopening. Now, some of our forum attendees who are listening in may recall that we conducted a similar session back in May with a select few schools in Europe and Asia who had recently reopened. For today, we have chosen 2 other schools far from New England with their own return to school reality to share with us. They'll be focusing on the experience primarily at the upper school level, in the high school, through the eyes of 2 12th grade students, as well as 2 teachers and an administrator. And we know that there are particular challenges at all levels of schooling, though we'll talk again mostly about that upper school experience today. I'd now like to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves and to give a bit of context very briefly before we dive into some specific questions. So we'll start in Beijing, starting with Tanya, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tanya Nizam, and I work at the Western Academy of Beijing. We just started school again a week and a half ago. We have students on site, and we also have a hybrid model, as about 30% of our teachers and students are outside the country, unable to return as yet. Our school has about 1,200 students altogether and about 200 teachers. And so the ratio right now on campus is about the same as it usually is.
Great, thank you, Tanya. Okay, and Kai, moving over to you then, please. You can unmute yourself there.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kai O'Shea, and I'm a 12th grade IB student, currently attending the Western Academy of Beijing. And I've been here for 6 years now.
Great, thanks, Kai. Moving to you, G, please.
Hello, everyone. Calling from the Zurich International School. We're an international school, about 1,200 students, offering IB and AP at 11th and 12th grade. We've been in 3 weeks of in-person learning under extremely strict hygiene, social distancing, and mask rules. And at any time, we expect to go to online learning based on number of cases and government regulations. So it's day to day.
Okay, thank you, G. And Ariel, moving to you, please.
Hello, my name is Ariel Hefliger. I'm an upper school social studies teacher at Zurich International School. And yeah, this is my 3rd week teaching with the students back in the classroom fully in person.
Great. All right. Good to have you here. And Ashim, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Osham Mitra. I'm a grade 12 student studying IB at Zurich International School, and I've been at this school for 5 years.
Excellent. All right. So I want to start with a question for the students who have all been in their schools for at least a few days now, but for a few years. And so you have a comparison to make from previous years reopening at the end of the summer to today, this week, last week. So starting with you, Kai, could you just give us a little kind of summary feedback on what's it been like getting back into school, and how different is it now from restarting, say, a year ago?
Going back to school at the beginning of this year has been obviously very different, but I think it's interesting to see everyone back, and I think everyone's just really happy to be back at school. So people aren't as concerned with the circumstances that we're going back to school, and more just happy to be here. But yeah, for sure. I mean, with the masks and social distancing and having to leave for lunch 5 minutes early and stuff like that. So small things like that, that day-to-day things are different, but I think everyone's overall is just happy to be back. At least I am.
Yeah, great, good. And how about you, Ashim? How different is it today from a year ago for you?
I would say our school actually isn't that different. While we do need to wear masks nowadays and there is more social distancing, the school's done well in still giving us all of our clubs or after school activities. Classes continue as normal, or normal, because we don't need to wear masks inside the classroom. So in terms of how different it was from last year before we went to online, schooling isn't actually that different from what we were expecting.
So inside the classroom though, are you still as large, your class sizes, as before? Have you just rearranged the classrooms differently in your case, Ashim?
So we have moved the tables and chairs 1.5 meters apart. So group work is a bit more difficult now unless we put masks on, and then we are free to mingle around the classroom and work with other people. But in terms of the delivery of the lesson, it's the same. I mean, sometimes activities are done more online, so we'd submit answers via Google Classroom as opposed to on a piece of paper. But there is no significant change from what happened last year with us.
Yeah. And Kai, in your case, for those classrooms, are you interacting with students similarly to what you were doing last year at this time, as far as class sizes and small group work and large group work?
In terms of the size of our classes, besides students not being able to come back into the country, we have been socially distancing, but differently to Ashim, we've had to always wear masks. Besides drinking water and eating food, there are no exceptions to having your mask off.
So even when you're distanced from each other, you still have to keep the mask on?
Yes, besides physical activity and eating and drinking inside, there are no exceptions. And so everyone, including teachers, must wear masks at all times.
Yeah. Now, for your two schools, are you able to opt out of being in the classroom? And if you wanted to stay home for school and do it remotely, you have that option?
For us, no. The Swiss government has mandated that all students must attend school. And if a student is in a high-risk health category, we have to make a provision that they would be able to come on campus and be socially distanced.
Okay. So in Switzerland, you actually have to show up to the building.
As of today.
Interesting. And time. As of today. Okay.
It means that they change, the rules can change. So we have to check the rules quite often, but as of today.
Right. I know Switzerland and lived there for 3 years and know about all of their rules. So Tanya, how about in China, that whole return to school?
So the government has decided that we could reopen the school in September, the 1st of September, and not before then. So that means that we really did need to open it and comply with that idea. However, if students don't want to come on site, there is a provision for them to then not come on site, but then they can't come on site at all for the whole 1 month of September, at least, until we can readdress and take a look at it again. Administratively, it's just too difficult in terms of complying with all the regulations that the government has put forward. So really, our decisions to, everything that we're doing in the school relates to the government direction of what is safe and what isn't. And Beijing has, China in general has been very careful, and Beijing has some very strict rules when it comes to organizations. We've all been COVID tested all delivery people have been COVID tested. If you work in a restaurant, you have been COVID tested, and many of our students have been as well. It's something that happens regularly. And so along those lines, if a student does not want to come on campus, they are allowed to not come on campus, but then they have to remain off campus for at least a month.
Interesting. And is that the Beijing rules, or is that the Western Academy of Beijing rules that they can't come for a whole month?
Well, yes, the whole month, it's to allow us to be able to comply with the rules. So while the rules don't say, well, then don't come to school at all, they're not saying that. But what they're saying is, if you don't come to school, we need to know why. And we need to know if you're sick. And it's one of those things, by the time you have all the different reasons, it's much better to say, well, no, you're just not coming for a month. If you say you're coming one day and not coming another day, it doesn't conform to the regular sort of monitoring of the whereabouts of the student. One of the things that the students are doing is, when they come on campus, we have to say where they are at any given time. Their temperatures are taken twice, and so on. So if they don't come to school one day, then there's a whole day when they're not being monitored, and their temperatures are not being taken, and therefore it doesn't conform to the pattern of monitoring that is required over here. It's an interesting thing. I can't quite join all the dots, and I'm not sure that the dots can be joined in a way that's completely logically transferable. But you know, we've been doing this now. We've been monitored in this way for 6-7 months now. Kai's been here for almost the entire time. I never left Beijing throughout this entire period, and it's interesting how you get so used to the idea of the authorities knowing exactly where you've been, and the benefit of that. If you follow those kinds of rules, and people always know where you are, because it's on your phone. Your phone knows where you've been, and your app on your phone knows where you've been. Because of that, I personally am allowed to go into many places that someone who has just arrived in Beijing, regardless of quarantine, they might find it difficult to access certain places.
Sure. Yeah. My colleague Trillium Hiblin, our associate director, just returned to home in Shanghai and is in a 14-day quarantine right now, according to their guidelines. Now, I'm curious, Ariel, to hear from you and the experience in the classroom in Switzerland. And I'm sure you're well aware of all the various rules governing your lives there. How has your experience been different this year compared to last year as a teacher?
I would say, first of all, is that it was difficult to plan, because during the summer and things, we didn't know what we were going to be coming into. We didn't know what the safety plan was going to be for the school. We didn't know if we were going to be shut down. We've heard stories of schools opening and closing 3 days later. So I think that just the uncertainty was very different this year than other years, in knowing what you were going to do. So that made it really difficult to plan. And I would say, when I first came into the classroom and started the new school year, there was certainly, for me at least, there was a sense of fear. You're in school. The biggest fear is, am I going to catch COVID? I took social distancing very seriously. So coming back to school was really my first time going kind of back into the public life. And that's quite a public life when you're with over 500 students in a building. And so it took a little time for me to get adjusted to it. But I think quickly I've seen how the school has implemented the use of the masks when kids are closer together, their distance 1.5 meters apart in the classrooms. We have the doors and windows open all the time. And you start to sort of take on this new reality, and then you can just get on with your job after a while. But it does take a little bit of time to get used to this.
Sure. Right. Now, in your case, Ariel, if somebody misses school for a day, which people do, what happens?
So at our school, we have all materials on Google Classroom, and we're required to be organized and have our lessons available. And so we won't necessarily do an extra special video or video call-in with a student who's absent. But like always, which we've done for years, is that the materials and the lesson plans are available for students via Google Classroom. So if a student misses my lesson, they can know exactly what we did, get the materials, and get caught up when they come back.
Okay, great. Yeah. And I want to ask the students again a little bit more about how safe you feel at the school? Does safety, and to what extent safety is being emphasized or stressed to you all as students, how to behave and how to interact on a day-to-day basis? Can you talk about that a little bit? Start with you, Kai, about the level of safety that you feel.
I think that because we're currently in Beijing and because there haven't been any cases, I feel very safe when I'm at school. And although it still feels very strict and it still feels very different to what we had last year, for example, I don't feel nervous going to school, and I overall just feel very safe.
Okay, good. And how about you, Ashim?
I feel extremely safe at school, including with the masks, the social distancing, the special drop-off pickup, including before school, and after school activities. I feel the school's done quite well making sure that we all feel safe. And even the students themselves, if the students have a cold or if they're sick or if they are displaying symptoms, they do stay home themselves. They then get checked in 24 hours, they get a result. And if they're still sick if they're still poorly, let's say after they've got the negative COVID test, they may come to school, but they spend the entire day wearing a mask. So students they still come to school if they're sick, but not with COVID, but they still make sure that they're social distance or that they're wearing a mask. So everyone's behaving quite well at our school, or at least on this campus.
Okay, and then again to the students, your experiences in the classroom, I understand are not that different. What about outside the classroom? And I'm wondering about things like your free time, lunch, and after school activities and sports. Can you speak to that experience? What's that like now this year? And Kai, if you don't mind sharing some thoughts on outside of classroom activities.
Outside the classroom, there's tape all over our high school and yellow dots placed on tables and chairs to show where people are allowed to sit and they're distance a meter apart. So in terms of our free time or when we're out of the classroom, we are still social distanced. We still have to have our masks on always. So it still feels very strange and not at all like it was last year. But in terms of sports, we actually haven't started our sports programs yet, and we won't be starting until next week. However, when we play, let's say, basketball in the gym or during PE, or when you're doing any physical exercise, you're not required to wear a mask. So in terms of sports and things like that, it feels exactly the same as it did last year.
Yeah, yeah. And how about you, Ashim? What's that like in Switzerland?
So lunch, each grade has been given their own area of the school where they can have lunch. So my grade, for example, is in the theater or the assembly hall. Grade 11, I believe, are in various classrooms. Grade 10 are in our actual cafeteria, and grade 9 are in a newly built it's a lobby forum. It's a collection of chairs on our ground floor with a presentation board. So we've all been split up for lunch, and we do need to maintain the 1.5 meter distance while eating. Then for lunch clubs, we do go to smaller classrooms, but if you're not maintaining distance or if you're not eating, you need to wear your mask again. We also need to have quite strict regulation on whether they're in the club meeting or not. So we have the attendance, whether they're present, absent, whether it's unexcused. And after school activities, I'm in cross-country running, so that is acting as if normal. You can't really run with a mask on. Most other sports are running. I believe rugby is currently not running because it is a contact sport. But other than that, all of the after-school activities that we normally have are running as normal.
Great. Yeah. G, please.
Thank you. We have tried to use the concept of as normal as possible. And so we've been lucky, as Ashim said, we've been able to keep a lot of the sports and after school activities. The one area that we haven't been able to normalize are the these trips and those additional classroom without wall experiences that I think that define our international school experience. And so that is an area where we are confined to our school and our local areas. So I think that's a big change in our school experience that will come as the school year continues to progress.
Right, right. And Gia, I have another question for you that is in some ways the impact of all of this. And as an administrator at Zurich International School, I'm sure you're part of conversations about how do we support the teachers and the students, not just academically, but socially and emotionally with all the stresses that they are feeling. And I'm curious, and others may have something to say about this too, but how are your schools addressing that element of the challenge of reopening, the social, emotional kind of impacts on especially young people?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think social emotional has always been a goal for us to address, but I think now with COVID, it's really a critical necessity. I think if I'm honest, there are areas we do well. I think with advisories in the high school or in the middle school, or kind of morning circles in the lower school, it's okay. But I think where we need to do better is particularly with our faculty. They will continue to be under a really huge strain to try to support students in a possible online learning and with changed pedagogies because of the 1.5 meter distance. And so I think with time, we need to do more about trying to find more specific ways of supporting teachers beyond you're doing a great job or something. So I think maybe we need to be thinking also about some support services that we might not be necessarily providing for our adults in the room, and then of course the parents as well. So I think the social emotional learning has been kind of only in the realm of students, and she even can talk about whether we're meeting those needs. But I think with the adults in the environment, we haven't done we need to do a better job about that, because if the adults are not healthy, then we're not going to be able to support the students as well. So we've only just begun conversations about that because we've been handling logistics. And I hope that we can get that on track soon, because it's better to have that in place in advance rather than waiting for a crisis.
Yeah, yeah. And Ariel, I'm sure getting ready for school in any summer is a challenge, and you noted that this one had particular challenges, and that's not even talking about the social and emotional kind of support that as a teacher ideally you're giving to students in the school. So I'm kind of curious, have you changed how you see your role as an instructor in the school, as one also has obligations beyond just teaching material? And I imagine you did even before the pandemic, but talk a little bit about the social emotional support role that you and your colleagues feel that you're taking on right now.
So I think our school, I have to agree that we do a pretty good job with our advisory. We keep them for 4 years. We get to build relationships. So right now, our advisory program, I'm a 10th grade advisor this year, my second year with my group. And I'm taking them out and having one-on-one conversations with each of them. We're looking over how the 6 months apart was, because we did have Zoom meetings with our advisory during the quarantine and but not during the summer. So I'm just checking in individually with every single one. If I can keep really strong tabs on just 10 students, and we all do that as advisors at our school, we're able to really check in on them. So not only looking at their social emotional, but also looking over like their end of year, like the online learning, like what happened with their grades, what happened with their learning, how did it go for them? So I'm looking back right now at how that time went with them, how they managed to be away from school, and how they're doing starting back at school. Within my own classrooms, in my content area, I am taking time to ask students. And when I started this school year, I was really hesitant to do any sort of group work. I first thought, okay, we're all going to stay in our 1.5 meter bubbles. But as I'm getting to see kids get really comfortable, we call mask on, time to mask up, put your masks on and sanitize, and we're grabbing our markers and we're doing something together as a group. I'm really want to check in with them. So I've been doing that a lot and trying to gauge their fears. And right now I would say that Asham, I hear a lot of that they really do feel comfortable. But some kids will wear a mask all the time, even though they don't have to. And I feel like at first some might have felt a little like, oh, I'm wearing a mask and someone next to me feels fine to not wear a mask. But I think it's become very accepting. Like kids who wear masks, they just wear them. And some people do because they need to for family reasons or personal reasons. And I feel like it's very accepted. It does wherever you're at with your safety.
Yeah. Great. And Tanya, if you don't mind speaking a little bit to how this year may be different in terms of the emotional and social kinds of supports that Beijing, that you're providing at Western Academy. How is that different now, maybe from what it was before?
Well, actually, some things in terms of emotional and social support, some things are probably a continuation of things that had started before, but perhaps have accelerated. And perhaps given the context has new meaning. So over the past year and a half, the idea of having much smaller mentor groups and also the purpose of mentor groups is something that was introduced at the start of sort of the 2019-2020 academic year. And or even a little bit before, but really, okay, so at the start of the 2019 year, mentor groups, the purpose had changed. They were designed to support students in planning every aspect of their week, because we had also started offering more options and choices of what students did with their week, a lot more flexible scheduling. And through that process, the idea was ultimately students and mentors would have a lot more communication in terms of a self-management, strategies for making choices, why one makes those choices, how one makes those choices, how one negotiates choices, and so on. And now because of this process, and I think sometimes online communication can actually make things more streamlined. Perhaps for some teachers and mentors, perhaps their relationship and the group relationship even flourished in the online environment we had for 4.5 months. In some cases, no. In some cases, that just didn't work and that fell apart. But now that we're sort of on campus, we have the added thing. I mean, I said earlier that the ratio of teacher to student in some ways hasn't changed, but the allocation is different. So if we take a look at, say, Kai's year group, for example, is a good example. There would normally have been 8 students in a room with 1 mentor. Because so many mentors are out of the country right now, they're being doubled up. So maybe there will be 1 mentor for 16 students. And so it's different. However, some of the norms have been established. So we're hoping that this is, that the social support and the understanding that's provided there is a good thing. One thing that I have found rather remarkable is throughout this whole process, our senior leadership, admin, have just stayed calm and collected and kind and modeled kindness, modeled giving space, modeled listening so well. There must have been a lot of conversation about this behind the scenes. I mean, they're lovely people anyway, but really, they've been truly tested. And I think by modeling that, that has filtered through the school. I don't think there's any teacher and who feels that they're being judged for finding things stressful. I can't think of many school days when I somehow haven't been thanked one way or another. It's been incredible. And when you have that filters through into the student's experience as well. If you're being treated with kindness and empathy and understanding as an adult, you know, which, I mean, let's face it, that doesn't always happen in, you know, in today's world. But that's really happening to us right now. And I'm hoping that that's also filtering down to the students. We're certainly getting that back from the students. We're finding that students are pretty patient with the process. So it must be something that's built into the social system.
That's great. I mean, I think, Tanya, it speaks to the effectiveness of leadership in your school that does that modeling, sets that tone, which is a way of setting expectations. This is how we behave here. This is how we treat each other. This is how we show appreciation, show concern and support. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I'm curious too about the impacts on the students, and I'll turn it to the students here for a moment and just say, for you, it sounds from what Tanya was saying, in some ways this has brought out the best in certain people, starting with some of the school leaders, and that has had a trickle-down effect on others in the school. In what ways for you all as students has this whole crazy 7-8 months of pandemic and now return to action, in what ways has it actually brought out good things in you personally or in your surroundings? What would you say about that, Kai?
I think that, as Mr. Zam said, our mentor groups have been doubled up. So now instead of 8 people in our small group, we have 16 or even 20, I think. And so I think a lot of people would look to that and say, wow, then, you know, you're less taken care of, or, you know, because your teacher has more students to deal with. But actually, in reality, it's more, I look around and I see a bunch of my peers and friends going through the same thing. So I think, as Mrs. M said, it speaks volumes to how we treat each other and how we expect to be treated and how understanding people are given the specific circumstances. So emotionally, this year I feel like it'll be hard, but it's very reassuring to know that I have friends and people around me and teachers and family that are going through something similar, because we are all in this together. So I think that at the end of the day, there is always support and there are always people that you can look to help. And I think that's a very reassuring thought.
That's great to hear. And it's not necessarily tied to the number of students assigned to each mentor. There's something else that can help ensure effectiveness in those kinds of social supports. That's well put, Kai. Ashim, how about you? What do you see as being maybe some of the better parts of this whole experience for you?
I can certainly say that when we went to our continuous learning plan, I believe, or the online learning, we began to rely on one another a lot more than we relied on our advisors, mainly because we only had advisory 1 time a week as opposed to what we used to have 5 times. So we began to, if we had social problems, academic problems, instead of contacting a teacher, we would contact one another and we try and learn from each other, which I think we've been able to use these skills because our school changed its schedule as well. So we got less advisory time. And because of the time we had only 1 meeting during online schooling, we learned to rely on one another a lot more. We've been able to use that more this year as we have less time with our advisor. But what that does mean is if we do need to speak to our advisor, it's a lot harder to get in contact with him or her because we're only meeting 3 times a week and they don't teach you. So it's sometimes a lot more difficult to find them in the building, especially if your higher level classes are taking up your flex blocks or the sort of extra time that we get.
Okay, right. And then I'm curious from the teacher perspective, Ariel, when you're designing your courses and thinking about your day ahead, are you in a kind of in an emergency teaching mode now, the way you were when you had to suddenly go online back in March, or are you seeing actual benefits to the disruptions that you've experienced over the recent months?
I would say that that's a good way to describe the beginning of online learning. It was very much like that. But now that we're back in school and we know there's a potential to go to online learning again, we've learned a lot already. And I think there are some benefits to have had that online learning experience. I see that students, I think that they really did start to take even more ownership and control over their learning because you weren't there as often to sort of watch students in the classroom to see how they're doing as much. We would have less online time as opposed to face-to-face as we would when we were in a regular schedule. So I think that students learned a lot and we really tried to focus on the skills that they need to sort of be independent learners. Now that we're back in school, I don't feel like I'm in emergency mode anymore. I'm ready for online learning when it comes because you can only be so ready. So I will be somewhat ready, but I don't feel that I'm in emergency mode at all right now.
Yeah, yeah, good. And I think, and this goes for students too, I think we're probably all a little more resilient than we sometimes think, and maybe than others looking in or the media might think we are. And G, I'm curious to ask you about the sort of impact on teaching, and you oversee curriculum in Zurich. So, and you're also aware of this part of our particular accreditation protocol that looks for learner engagement and autonomy. And Ariel talked about how we had to sort of give up some ownership and control of the teaching as we went online in this emergency mode. So I'm wondering, because that suggests to me that maybe students were given more autonomy over their learning. How are you managing that in Zurich and maybe encouraging this release of control as teachers to allow more student-driven activity, if indeed that's what's happening? And I'll ask you the same thing, Tanya.
I think you're right. I think this has given us an opportunity, particularly in the middle and the upper school, where teachers have been able to use strategies like the flipped classroom or other online tools where they've been able to gather feedback in a more efficient way. So I think it has actually benefited some of the pedagogies for the older students as far as giving students much more autonomy. We had a model where the students were online, but they had the whole afternoon to work independently, and that worked really well. I think where it's been problematic is really in the lower school. Having students online and trying to be autonomous in their learning as a first grader, while theoretically is a great idea, in practice, we know that students and parents struggled, because ultimately then the parent kind of had that semi-educator role. So we have struggled, I think, in the primary school to balance to find the opportunities more like we've had than in the older kids. With the older kids, they were able to take on that challenge and really run with it. But if I'm honest with you, from the younger kids, maybe in the kindergarten, first grade area, it was a huge challenge, and it still is, and we're still wondering how we best do that. And the only way we've been able to solve it is just a lot of social one-to-one checking in with students that we have tried to make that work. So from an impact point of view, I think it is a huge opportunity to support autonomy and engagement, because there are some students who actually reported they preferred the virtual learning environment. But, again, the learning styles, and especially on the socialization aspect of it, continues to be a challenge.
Thank you. Great. Yeah. And Tanya, if you don't mind, can you speak to that a little bit?
So addressing autonomy in the school, student autonomy, 10 days ago when we were about to start, we had just spent time preparing for this year. And the idea of students coming on campus with their masks, with this meter distance, with all the rules, it felt like we were going to be operating in a way that where we were losing the magic of what makes a school so special, which is student choice, student ability to walk down the corridor and just make a decision of when they do what they do. Sure, they have to be in lessons. However, within that, there was so much freedom of coming and going. It felt like all that was not going to be there. But what actually happened is something different. Now, one thing about our school is that for the past few years, we've been working towards giving students choice in pacing their learning. And to assist that, we've been trying to develop online lessons anyway. It's been a very slow process because there's so many different ways of giving students choice and ways of pacing other than using online systems. Now, right now, with so many teachers outside the country and so many students outside the country, every single lesson in the high school and middle school, and for that matter, is in one form or another online, available online on a single platform. We use Microsoft Teams. So one of the things that's happening to the students in Beijing is that they might be going to a class where they have a teacher because their teacher's in Beijing. But if their teacher is not in Beijing, they have a choice. They can either go to a quiet study room where they do their lesson online, or they could just go to another lesson of that subject in that same year group. They could just go to a different one. It may not even be their subject. They might be a physics student who just goes and sits in a chemistry class. That's possible. Or they could just go to any other class they want to, if they have to sign up for it. So, and attendance needs to be taken, but they can sit in that classroom and just experience that form of learning. So there's an element of choice in what students do with that time. And we're finding that students are experiencing interesting things. They might deliberately walk into an art class and actually just start participating. They would have needed to sign up beforehand, and it's all contingent to materials, but you know, that sort of thing is possible too. So in a way, we're holding on to the idea of choice and autonomy in that way, while the mentorship and just the systematic monitoring of work is also continuing to make sure students stay on track. Does that sort of answer the question?
Yeah, so let me follow up. Teachers in that setting, are they being asked to do a lot more than normal, than otherwise, than a year ago, in order to make this work with a third of the students outside of China, but coming in on teams during the day? That has to be more work for the teachers. Can you just speak to that for a bit? And I see you nodding, G, too, for Switzerland, but talk about Beijing if you would, Tanya.
Sure. So as a teacher in Beijing, I would say that we have been very politely and with a lot of kindness been requested to somehow do this. We've been given many options in the way that we would post lessons online. So I teach all my lessons in person. And in addition to that, I post something online. What I could, if I wanted to, just record my entire lesson, have a camera there, and then just go and post that. The facility is there, and we've been given training in a platform that allows that to be easy. Now, that's not the best kind of online lesson at all. I personally don't do that. I haven't done that as yet. What I do is I have a standard sort of a lesson format that I do to make it easy for a student to follow, a video, an activity, that kind of thing. Yes, it is more work. However, what we're also being encouraged to do is collaborate and share the load with each other. So if you teach that subject and somebody else teaches that subject too, perhaps there's a difference. Maybe there's something not quite the same about your lessons. However, there can be a way of sharing it. If I give my TOK coordination as an example, I'm the TOK coordinator, and my team of grade 11 teachers, I'm doing the majority of planning at the moment since I'm the most experienced and it's a new course. However, those teachers are preparing videos that they've produced, which we will then all be using, or they are preparing an activity, which then we will all be using, things like that. But they are actually, apart from one, they're all outside the country, so it makes it quite difficult for them. I think it's in the spirit of support, and we also have the feeling somehow that when our colleagues get back to Beijing, we're just going to be relieved that they're back, and it's going to be so good to have them that this extra workload we've taken on now is going to all be worthwhile.
Right, right. So, and I think I was just bumped off the call there for a sec, so sorry about the little disruption. But so Tanya, just practically speaking, as a teacher, as I've heard it happens in other schools, keeping a live video feed during class so that if students want to tune in live from another country who are part of that classroom, they can see the teaching happening and be part of that classroom? No. Or is that not the expectation for teachers?
That is definitely not the expectation because of the time difference. So we have, throughout this whole period, we've been asynchronous. Right now, we can have some synchronicity to keep things going. So before the summer holiday, we were specifically told there was absolutely no expectation to be synchronous. Now the idea is if you are outside the country, then you'll do at least one lesson a week for each subject where students tune in. It doesn't have to be Beijing time. It could be another time, but it's a time that's coordinated. Most likely it's Beijing time when that subject is going on. But no, if as a teacher in Beijing, I do not stream my classes live for other students to see. That would defeat the purpose of the nature of what it is to teach your lesson in a classroom of students where you fully engage with them, if you're sort of performing for a camera too. Instead of that, we post online lessons in whichever way we see fit. I'll give you one example though, which is, this is something a few of us have tried. I have a colleague who's outside the country, and because it is a science subject and because she teaches grade 12 and time is running out a little bit for them, I'm also a biology teacher. So I stepped in and I offered to take one of her classes and run some practicals. So while we were running it, at some point, it just seemed logical to just beam her up onto the screen live in a live video stream. Now, she couldn't really direct them that much, but students came up to my laptop to have a little chat with her every now and then and went back to what they were doing. And it was a lovely way to sort of co-teach with students feeling that their teacher was there. And they also had added support of another teacher. But there was no expectation at all that we would do that. We just did it because it was nice.
Yeah, nice. Okay, well, thank you. Now, I'm curious, for the students' perspective, how you all, as you have one more year now of high school, how you're feeling about your future and next year. And let me start with this question. Do you feel as though you are gaining more independence now through this experience and feel more ready for being out on your own in college? Or more uncertain? Can you try to characterize that a little bit? And Ashim, maybe start with you. And actually, why don't we start with the question of, what are your plans for next year? And then a little bit more about your perspective on looking at next year.
Okay, so I want to study philosophy, politics, and economics in either Ireland, the UK, or Holland. How COVID hasn't exactly changed my plans for which universities I want to go to. I couldn't visit one of them due to COVID, but luckily I went before lockdown hit. I feel like during online learning, we got a lot more independence on how we could study ourselves. For example, we just had the half-an-hour blocks in the morning for each class, and then the rest of the afternoon was considered your own time. So I went running first, and then I would continue doing all of my work. So I felt like I gained a lot of independence, which helped, which I assume will help me at university.
Great. Yeah, good to hear that. How about you, Kai? What are your plans for next year?
My plans for next year will either be to go to Australia, Canada, or Holland. And I think that this whole pandemic has really allowed me to become more self-motivated, I suppose, because there wasn't always a teacher to tell you to do your work, or a parent, or because we are at that age now where we have to start working for ourselves, right? So I think it was a really good experience for me personally to see how it would be in university, because you are given a bit more freedom, and I think that it's really important that you learn how to be able to still work and still find time to be productive. And so I think that during this time, I've discovered that I am quite self-sustaining and I am able to stay on top of things, despite, not having to wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning, or not having to go to classes and sit through classes and teachers speaking all the time. But despite all of that, I was still able to work quite effectively. So I thought that this experience was quite beneficial in terms of moving forward in my education.
It's great to hear. And it is partly a learning experience for you too. Ariel, how is this going to change your future as a teacher, your practice, your attitude, your approach, if at all, as you look ahead, not just this year, but in future years as a teacher?
I think that's a really hard question to answer. It's a really good question, but there's so many uncertainties, and it's a wonder, is this going to be just the normal for another year, or is it going to continue on? But one thing that I feel like I've really kind of grasped onto is the idea of being flexible. And I like the idea of being kind as well. Kind and you're flexible because you don't know what's going to happen next. I think one thing that I've really enjoyed with the online learning is sort of giving students the opportunity to work on their own in small groups and then having a check-in with them, and doing that on these new softwares that are available. Some of the ones that you'll start using online, you might end up using them back in the classroom after the pandemic. So I think it's made us more open to new types of software or apps to use, but also I don't want to go overboard with them, but I have enjoyed learning new technologies that I want to maybe some of them keep on permanently in the classroom.
Yeah, great. And I'm curious to ask this question, and anybody can speak up and let me know. And the question is, how do you think school will be different in the future as a result of what we've gone through over the last 8 or 9 months as well as a planet? How will, and maybe, and I'll ask this question, especially of the students, how should school be different after all of this? Anyone want to speak to that?
I'm happy to start because I'll start from an
Sure,
over school. I think one of the huge opportunities that this pandemic will serve is that we educators always talk about the things that we consider as important to learning, like character or 21st century skills, independence, all of those things that, you know, come up in curricula. But we end up spending a lot of time sometimes more on the content. That's just the nature of the beast. And I think with this pandemic, it is going to push us, and it already has pushed us, to be more focused on, you know, providing that autonomy, providing that agency. And you know, even with the IB, they've kind of pared down their curriculum. So I think it's pushing us to do those things that we know that we need to be focused on. I mean, in a nutshell as well. So I think there are opportunities, again, that we don't have, you know, less is more in a lot of curricula. And I say that as a director of curriculum, I think that there is usually too much curricula, and we need to use this pandemic as an opportunity to focus on truly learning impact, not just learning content. That's aspirational.
Thank you, G. Yeah. Well put, well put. And to you, Tanya, in just a sec, but I'll note that not only has the IB exams been disrupted, but the College Board itself here based in the US has also canceled a number of SAT administration testing dates. And we know that a lot of colleges here in the US are so-called test optional now, and more. And we'll be spending some time in future forums on the question about college admissions coming up later this fall. But Tanya, talk about the future, if you would, at Beijing.
I do agree with G and with Jeff that something's going to change in terms of content and testing. But there's something else that that strikes me. We found that some students do really well with online learning. They like the streamlined nature of it. It's very, when it's done well, it's very matter of fact. There's a pathway, you move at your pace, and they like it. They can plan their time around, and as Kai said, you don't have to, you know, wake up that early in the morning, and you just get it done. And there's some students who really, really do not like it. They really need the interaction. They need all those extra things that happen in a classroom and in a school. And I think with these two types, if we take these two types of learners, we're sort of creating new categories. We're creating new language around that. And I think we're going to hear a lot more about all that in this big industry that we call that about pedagogy and the way that that education is carried out. I think we're going to see a lot more growing in both directions. We are really finding that some students thrive in that environment, and that is so fascinating. And that there's a specific kind of teaching that's required. Now, one of the things that we found that we've been learning is that a good teacher can be a good teacher whether it's online or not. but that also takes certain types of skills and awarenesses. I think all these things are going to be evolving in the very near future.
You know, I think in many ways you're speaking to what has been really a grand global experiment. How do we do when things are as disrupted as they are now? And what we're learning, I think, and what you all are reporting is that we're managing and we're actually learning some things that we might not have discovered had we not gone through this crazy global experiment of ours. And our hope is that indeed there will be some things that we take from this that will make future schooling even better and more impactful. And we've been blessed to have the technology that we have. Can you imagine if this had happened 25 years ago, what would we be doing? So here we are today in 2020, able to actually, you know, manage some of this. And we're almost out of time here, but I want to just take a moment to say thank you to all of you for, you know, for your input. I do feel like we could continue this conversation. And I would want to ask Ashim, the philosophy major to be, about what is the purpose of school and what have we learned through the pandemic? And I'm giving you 2 minutes to answer that question.
I've never actually studied philosophy before, but I'll try my best. I think schools is about teaching us skills as opposed to teaching us actual facts. For example, in history class, knowing the dates of the events and what those events led to is extremely important and extremely fascinating. But what you're really gaining from a history class is the ability to think critically, to synthesize your ideas, to analyze events and how they connect. So I'd say the entire goal of school learning as a whole is not what we come out knowing, but what we come out being able to do. So I think online it was okay because, okay, we didn't get to learn as much, but we got so many new skills that we just wouldn't have if we'd stayed at school. So that's why I think online, it wasn't a hindrance to our education. It may have even opened more doors for teachers to teach us in new ways and students to learn in new styles. So I think that is the point of education, to give us new skills. And I think online and both of our schools have done that so well from what I've heard.
Awesome.
Well put. I think you're going to do fine with your philosophy major, Ashim.
Yeah. What a
And that's
great
coming from a philosophy major here. Thank you.
A perfect way to end the webinar, Ashim. Thank you so much. And thanks to all of you for listening in, contributing your questions, and sharing your thoughts with us today. We realize we did not cover every relevant topic or get to everyone's questions, but we'll continue to promote information sharing across the work of NEASC schools. So for our panelists, my co-host Jeff, and everyone at NEASC, I'm Allison Geary. Thank you so much for joining us today, and have a great day.